All right, do we have everybody back from the breakouts, Kathy?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Sorry.
Let's get started. Welcome.
Well, this is one of the interpreters. I was wondering if it's basically the other interpreter, so should have a team. And he was here earlier, but I don't see him here anymore.
Do you remember the gentleman's name?
Rudy.
He might have gotten, maybe something happened with his tag.
Right. All right, well, all right, then let's go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you to those who were able to join the Networking by Affinity group this morning. And hopefully that was helpful to meet others across the state who do similar work, possibly similar work to the work that you do. And hopefully there was some good exchanges that happened. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Lacroix, and I'm co-director with Strategies TA for the Central Valley and Southern California regions through Children's Bureau of Southern California. And now I'd like to introduce my co-director, Michael Williams.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Williams. As Sarah says, I'm the co-director for Strategies TA at the Child Abuse Prevention Center in Sacramento, covering Northern California. And I'm excited to get today started. I think we can go to the next slide. And note what an amazing team effort this has been. Strategies TA is funded by the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. And those of you who were at the summit 2 years ago know that OCAP and the Child and Family Wellness, Wellbeing Cabinet of CWDA and the Child Family Policy Institute co-sponsored that. And since then, we've had broader collaboration in getting this going, including the Office of Tribal Affairs at CDSS and the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission. So we're very excited to get started. I think next slide.
Great, thanks, Michael. So I imagine most folks are familiar with Zoom at this point, but again, we never want to assume and want to make sure everybody can have the best experience possible today. So on your screen, you'll see a couple of kind of basic Zoom instructions. So generally speaking, you'll have your toolbar on the bottom, unless you decide to shift that to another location. And on that toolbar, you'll have the option to mute or unmute yourself. So you can click that microphone button to speak and unmute. You have the option to turn your camera on or off using the start video icon. You can also chat with us, ask questions, make comments. If you need support as well, please reach out through the chat and you're able to type your responses there. We do have closed captions available today, and that is through, there's a little live transcript or CC button on your toolbar as well. So if you'd like to see those captions, you can have them happen throughout the day. You can also change the size of them, or you can hide them by clicking on that button if you decide you don't need those. And today we're hoping to give folks the opportunity to self-select into the rooms for the most part that they'd like to be in, unless they are specific county assignment rooms. So on your toolbar, I think it is based on those who have had a chance to update their Zoom app. If you are joining directly from Zoom on the web, it should have done the updates automatically for you, but you have a breakout room button, and you'll be able to click on that and automatically select and join the rooms that you'd like to. So we're hopeful that most folks will have that option on their toolbar. However, if you look around and don't see it anywhere, sometimes there's a 3 little dots that you can click on to find it. I know one person mentioned that they have that there. Or if you are not able to see any of the breakout room options through any of your toolbar, please reach out to us in the chat with where you'd like to go. Anything else, team, that you'd like to add about the Zoom instructions today?
Yeah, one thing Regarding the breakout rooms, if everyone, if you see your name listed among the participants, if you go into the participants menu, you have the option to rename yourself. And we ask everyone rename themselves with their county first. Our first breakout will be by county and our second one will be by region. So if you're there with county first and you have trouble getting into a breakout yourself, we can quickly move you to where you need to be.
Thanks, Michael. Anything else, support team, you'd add for our folks to navigate Zoom the best way possible? All right, next slide.
So here's our agenda today. We will have an official welcome from, Cheryl Treadwell from CDSS. Our keynote today is from Junius Williams. We will introduce him shortly. Our breakout in county teams will be really talking about some of the challenging material and reflections that Junius is going to introduce and seeing how they apply back in our counties. We'll have a break after that. Our next breakout, number 2, will be connecting with your region with brief updates from each county in the region about the state of your prevention planning. And then after that, we will have an update on the state of prevention in California from our CEO at the CAP Center, Sheila Boxley. And afterwards, you are invited to continue your county conversation and maybe talk a little bit about what topics to cover next or tomorrow and a county virtual brown bag lunch from 12 to 12:30. And next slide. I'm passing it on to our colleague at OCAP, Hillary Conrad.
Good morning and welcome to the statewide child abuse prevention planning convening. We are grateful to have you joining us in this exciting collaborative space and have you as part of this historic prevention planning effort. I'm the manager of the Prevention Network Development Unit within the Office of Child Abuse Prevention, and I want to start off with a thank you from myself, my team, and Strategies TA for your dedication and commitment to building prevention systems and networks across the state. Both our teams will continue to partner with you as you move forward through this prevention planning journey. We are thrilled to have this opportunity to connect with all of you and want to recognize that we understand each team faces competing priorities and are so pleased that as teams, you continue to prioritize prevention planning. Today, we would like to reflect upon the work your teams have completed, will complete, and be inspired to continue this prevention work into the future. As you probably know, the Office of Child Abuse Prevention released a new 5-year strategic plan in 2020. It contains 3 main goals: lifting through capacity building, linking through a shared prevention agenda, and leveraging resources to build protective factors through community and natural supports. You and your teams are setting the bar for the achievement of these goals every time you meet and collaborate with one another. You are assessing strengths and needs, integrating community voice, building cross-sector collaborative networks of support, gathering and sharing data across systems, and developing the foundation to build the infrastructure for a comprehensive continuum of care. Thank you all for being part of this monumental shift from a reactive child welfare system to a proactive system which serves all children, youth, families, and communities. Give yourself a huge pat on the back. You are trailblazers and champions of change. I have the pleasure this morning of introducing one of the fearless leaders within the Department of Social Services. Cheryl Treadwell has been dedicated to improving the outcomes for children, youth, families, and communities for 22 years in various capacities and projects throughout the division. Previously, some of her earlier work included, but was not limited to, ensuring that policies and procedures were in place to provide developmental screening as an early intervention strategy for all children, including young children in child welfare. And she has provided project management for several years over the original Title 4E waiver project that yielded the evidence to support use of flexible 4E dollars for prevention services. laying the groundwork for Family First Prevention Services Act. In April of this year, she was appointed to her new role as the chief for the Safety, Prevention, and Early Intervention branch. As the branch chief, she will be responsible for developing an integrated system invested in upstream approaches to prevent child maltreatment and strengthen families and communities. Please join me in virtually welcoming Cheryl Treadwell.
Thank you, Hillary. Good morning, everyone. I see new and familiar faces, and I am very excited to be here today to kick off this statewide prevention planning convening. Being with the department for 22 years, I am very excited that to end part of my career, this part of my career on the front end of the system and doing this work. So it's very timely for me, and I'm excited with joining this effort. One piece of information that I would like to update you on before I get into the welcome is you'll be the first to hear that we will be submitting our plan this week. We're on track to do that. And I wanted to at least appreciate those of you who provided input into our prevention plan. The input that we received from you was very useful, and now on to the hard work is the implementation phase. So I look forward to spending time with you planning that as we go forward. I apologize that I won't be able to spend the entire day with you, but I'll be excited to hear about the outcome of the day, and I will be spending the second day with you because right now we as the leaders in CDSS are having our leadership forum as we work on our equity work plan for the future of our efforts. As Hillary had mentioned, it seems that for the last 2 years, you've been working on these cross-sector collaborative teams and with the purpose to focus on primary and secondary prevention. It looks like you've had 20 or so more counties involved, and it looks like others are expanding to join this great transformation. So I want to encourage you today to connect with each other, embrace your purpose and your shared mission on prevention planning, and to keep the momentum going. There's a lot to be learned from each other as your peers as you focus on the importance of this work, but mostly focusing on the importance of using an equity lens as you deal with your community engagement and as part of your prevention planning. And because of the times, or in spite of the times, CDSS's commitment as well as yours should be focused on addressing disproportionality and the disparities in our system. It is our current reality, and that our system has to change, and we have to be very intentional about that in your prevention planning, to always use an equity lens when assessing, when planning, and implementing the system change. I hope that you will be open, committed to hear the voices of those that have been marginalized, underserved, traumatized, not only in this system, but in our society, because we know the systemic racism is real. We want to make sure that we work closely and continue to team, and we have all the tools that in our toolbox. I'm channeling Richard Connect here when we talk about what's in our toolbox, what we want to address in the areas of the concern in a new way. We have a chance to set a new standard, including community voice and valuing that input. And remembering that once you invite the community in, you can't uninvite the community out. So be intentional and genuine with that commitment of engagement. Value that input so you can target your best investments on prevention. I think when counties invest in prevention with intentional and targeted effort, you are setting the communities up for success. And prevention investments in that way will lead to improved social determinants of health, the reductions of adverse child events, and you will begin to have strong protective factors within the communities and the families. I applaud your work, and I recognize that it takes exceptional leadership to be willing to make that commitment for this change. And you have everything, I think, in this moment. For the years that I've been here, you had the resources, you have the will, you have the commitment. Take advantage of this moment to restore and strengthen the capacity of families when they're facing difficulties. So on behalf of the leadership and on behalf of my branch and others that are in this work, I thank you all for staying the course and your commitment for breaking down the silos to sort of reimagine a system that we feel should support, uplift every individual, everyone in families and in our communities. So that is my time, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. What a great way to start. I get the pleasure of and the honor of introducing our keynote for today. Some months back, I had the opportunity to attend a webinar run by Junius Williams, who is a private consultant working with the Collective Impact Forum at the Aspen Institute, through the Sacramento Prevention Cabinet and their Child Safety Forward Department of Justice grant. And I was, among everyone else on that virtual workshop, energized and challenged to really take a real hard look at our work. So I am excited to introduce Junius Williams and his great frames and questions to move us forward. So thank you, Junius, for joining us, and take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Michael. I'd also add my thanks to Sarah and also to Stephanie Weldon, who helped me in the process of preparing to understand the work that y'all are doing. I'm in Oakland today. Oakland is Muwekma Ohlone lands. Acknowledge and respect peoples of those tribes. I also, though, want to thank you this morning for attending the session. It's important work that you're doing around preventing child abuse, and you know better than I do this last period of the pandemic has put even more stress on children and families, and I'm not sure that we fully understand kind of what we need to be doing around this change that's happened to all of us in the culture and the impact that it has on our children. I'm encouraged that you're attempting to utilize collaborative methods to move the needle on the prevention issues, because cross-sector, multi-stakeholder collaboration, when it's done correctly, can help to make it better in terms of people like you who are doing the work in partnership with your communities, but also makes for better outcomes at a population level. I understand that y'all are at various stages of forming and operating your collaboratives and tackling all the myriad of issues that need attention, not only in the core work that you're trying to do around abuse prevention, but also the second track of work when you adopt a collaborative approach is that you're building collaborative infrastructure and muscle. And people can get frustrated by that because you're moving out of your traditional organizational structures to accomplish this work and building out this new infrastructure. So I always want to raise that issue because, often we use this metaphor of building the plane while flying. This is a concrete example of actually doing that and working on two different engines at the same time that seem to be experiencing somewhat different problems. You've got your substantive issues, and how do you refine your strategies and interventions to make a population level impact, and how do you build out this infrastructure so that it has enough power in the engine to get you to where you want to go. As Michael mentioned in the introduction, the past couple of years I've been working with the Collective Impact Forum at the Aspen Institute and working with folks around the country on how to use that particular approach. And one of the things I'll start with is by saying there are a lot of different models or approaches out there for how one can effectively do cross-sector or multi-stakeholder collaboration, and different sort of approaches or models emphasize different things. I'm going to use as a context and a frame the collective impact approach because I think it has several features that are important, and I'm going to, in the time I have, introduce you to that particular approach and some of the elements of it. And then I want to dive a little deeper into some of the critique of that particular approach as it relates to three key issues. One of them is how you do community engagement and how that gets integrated and embedded into the work. There's a second issue around equity. And then there's a third issue around whether or not this is really about somehow shifting power between the community and various interests in the community and those of us who exercise power and control over processes like this. So you have and will have available to you the deck that I'm going to use. Just a note of caution, I always prepare a lot more slides than I have time to really detail, but I want people to have kind of the complete, a more complete picture. And in addition to that deck, I've also made available with Sarah and Michael two other decks from presentations. One that goes a little deeper into equity, and the second one goes a little deeper into the 4 tools that I'll introduce you to today. So a lot of frameworks, a lot of frames and tools is kind of where I try to help people. And let me just be frank, I no longer try to convince people about why it's important to do equity. If you haven't figured out that equity and us doing a good job at being effective in equity is not an existential issue for us, it's very hard to convince anybody at this point. So I've stopped trying to convince people and more focus on, if you have made that transition where you understand the importance of doing this, here are some tools that will help you navigate the terrain. So you'll have all of the slides that I'm going to go through today, as well as a couple of other decks available to you. And I'm going to go ahead and test this technology and load my deck and get us started here. And can you see my deck? Can somebody acknowledge? You're seeing my deck?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. I have double screens and they sometimes go crazy and I don't know what people are saying. Okay. One of the things is you've got a very detailed table of contents that if you want to use this later to navigate through it. But I'm going to start and do a few minutes on just the collective impact approach, and then I'm going to dive down more into equity and share with you some tools for trying to navigate the equity work. With respect to questions, if you've got questions as we're going along, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'd ask Michael and Sarah to kind of monitor that. If there's any patterns coming up that I need to stop and address something, please let me know. And then I'm going to have a couple of points where I'll just pause and we'll go into just full Q&A. So you can pose questions or comments either way. So I want to start off by just jumping into collective impact. The authors of collective impact call it an approach and not a model. And for people who come out of kind of clinical backgrounds, that's an important distinction. because if you're doing a model, it's been tested and you've got to have some fidelity to the model. That's not what's happening here. The origin of the collective impact approach is a couple of scholars, practitioners, asking the question of what are the patterns associated when we've seen people be able to organize themselves and make large scale kind of population level change. And they went around the United States, but other places in the world. And what they found is that there were some patterns behind people who seemed to be able to achieve success working collaboratively on what theretofore are some pretty intractable social problems that we'd had trouble moving on. And out of that came an article in 2011 in the Stanford Social Innovation Review called Collective Impact, where they summarized here are the 5 conditions that we saw present when there was evidence that people had moved the needle. And so their definition of collective impact is a long-term commitment of a group of important actors from different sectors to a common agenda to solve a specific social problem at scale. And let me go back and highlight, you know it better than I do. Many of the intractable problems we're trying to deal with are long term, and we're not going, there's no, and I hate this metaphor, there's no silver bullet, there's no panacea out there that we apply and can cure this quickly. This is long term work, and if you're not in it for the long term, you're unlikely to achieve sustainable systemic change. Secondly, the idea of sectors is in the original definition, but if you would note my earlier description, it's multi-sector and multi-stakeholder, because sectors may come out of kind of economic analysis. You know, what are the sectors in economy? We're talking a little bit different. We're talking about sectors in society, like philanthropy, like business, like government, like social institutions. But we're also talking about different stakeholder groups, and especially we're talking about people who are the intended beneficiaries of our work and how they are engaged in the process of problem identification and problem solution. We're talking about people with lived experience that I may not have, I may have been a survivor of abuse when I was a child, so I've got some lived experience that I can bring to bear. So it's not just about sectors, it's also about some population groups. Secondly, this notion of a common agenda. Much of the collaboration that we've historically done is we all get together and we ask the question of, I got my agenda, how is whatever you're doing contributing to my agenda? And we do that sort of brokering. Collective impact is saying, no, that's not what we need to be doing. We need to all come together and form a common agenda and devote and focus our resources and attention on that. So that common agenda notion is an important element or condition of collective impact. A specific social problem, the authors argue that you need to get very focused on a specific intractable social problem. And while much of the collective impact work has attempted to do that, increasingly people are broadening from that. I noted earlier that there was mention of the social determinants of health. There are social determinants of everything. It's not just health. There's social determinants of education. There are these intertwined social issues that we saw manifested, especially during the pandemic, that interact with each other. And while it's understandable that we would want to get focused, and that's appropriate, you can't lose a sense of the broader context in which most of these problems occur. And you probably know better than I do that when you start tracking the litany of factors that contribute to abuse, that a myriad of other social factors that aren't directly connected, like one's economic status, housing overcrowding, mental health issues, inadequate nutrition. You run the litany. So everything is a social determinant. I just make the point that while it's important to be specific, you can't lose a sense of the context in which problems are getting produced, because you can get too myopic and focused and lose a sense that there's an external driver. And then finally, there's this notion of scale. Much of what we tried to do around social problems is that we find a bright spot or a great program here or there, and we find out that it works, but we never get them to scale. So we've got all of these things strewn around the landscape of most communities that were a great pilot project with 100 kids, but it never got beyond the 100 kids. And when analyzing the particular social problem, there were 10,000 kids who were at risk of that particular problem, and we got 100. You got to get to scale. Scale is defined differently by various folks. Aspen Institute, when we did the Opportunity Youth Initiative some years ago, we defined it as impacting 10% or more of the young people who were out of school and out of work in a community. So that's a basic definition. And let me quickly kind of run you through what the 5 conditions are that they found present when people were able to achieve large scale. I've already mentioned a common agenda, but it goes a little further. A common definition of what the problem is. It's the aggregation and accumulation of data which really document not only the current status, but the trajectory of that problem. It's beginning to generate some sense of what the effective strategies and interventions are, and it's leading towards some shared vision of how change is going to happen with respect to the problem, the focal problem. Secondly, there's this idea or condition of shared measurement, where you're all agreeing that we've got some metrics that we're going to measure whether or not we're accomplishing that outcome at a population level in our community. So you're collecting data and measuring results together. You're doing performance evaluation and management. You're employing some interventions or strategies or interventions to affect the problem. Are you evaluating them robustly so you know what works and doesn't work so you can bring things to scale? Is there a sense of shared accountability? More important than almost any of those are 2 things that aren't mentioned, and it's one of my critiques of this particular approach, is shared learning and continuous improvement. That you've got to put an emphasis when you've got collaboratives together on people learning together, generating data about what's going on, analyzing, interpreting that, collectively figuring out what it means, so that you've got collective learning that leads to, if the intervention or strategy isn't working, how do we adjust and adapt it so that we can continuously improve? And as long as you're on a pattern of continuous improvement, it's salvageable. It's when you stop making improvement that people get frustrated and leave the table. There's third, the concept of mutually reinforcing activities, that once you come up with a common agenda and you've got shared metrics and you've got an understanding of what sort of strategies and interventions may impact the problem, then you have to start looking around the community and figuring out, well, how do you align some other things that are going on in the community to get them focused and targeted on their contribution to your outcomes? Let me give you a quick example. Grade level reading, big issue. How do we get all kids reading at the appropriate grade level so that they can partake of the rest of the curriculum? Well, if you are doing your analysis and you're saying, okay, we've got a number of different strategies. We're going to work with teachers to improve their ability to teach reading. We're going to, get kids to school because we know attendance is correlated. When you get to the after-school providers, you need to be able to say, hey, the evidence suggests that kids who regularly attend after-school programs tend to come to school more regularly and tend to have higher levels of academic achievement. So that helps the people who are in the after school program to understand how their work connects to moving the agenda and getting to this large scale change. There's also this notion of continuous communication. You've built a collaborative and you've got a community, and the communications infrastructure really needs to address them both. You need to be able to effectively communicate with the tables and work groups and the infrastructure that you've built to move on this particular problem, but you also need to be communicating to the broader community, because when you find the right solutions, you need to be able to have a relationship of confidence with the public where when you come to say, we think we've got a solution here and we want the community to widely support and invest in that. You need to, that's not a last minute thing. You need to build a communication system that helps them to get there. Because it also is noted here, it fosters a sense of trust that people know that you have regularly and accurately communicated with them. And then the final feature is something called a backbone support, which is basically what many of us who did collaboration before it became popularized. Collaboration always came out of your hide. You know, somebody around the table had to carve out a little staff time to try to do all the work that it takes for people to collaborate. One of the things that collective impact approach suggests is no, don't do it that way. What you need to do is to put together a dedicated staff whose role is to support the collaborative, to support that executive committee or to support that steering committee or those work groups or all of the work that it takes for people to collaborate. And that's called the backbone support organization or backbone support functions. So those are the five conditions or elements that Kanya and Kramer articulated as a part of the collective impact approach. Really quickly though, one of the things that many of us noted, I've been doing cross-sector collaboration really since back in the 90s when I joined the staff of Urban Strategies Council with Angela Glover Blackwell, who later went on to be the founder of PolicyLink. So I've been doing it a long time, and what many of us readily realized or immediately realized, there's a lot of truth to those five conditions, but it's missing some things. And here are the things that we thought were missing. And I'm not going to go through them in great detail, but I want to mention them again because I think they're fundamentally important. Stakeholder and community engagement. If you're forming some kind of collaborative, the first thing you need to ask is, who is at the table and do we have the right people? And our tendency is to go to the usual suspects, the power brokers, the agency staff, the big CBO staff, the institutional players in the community. And while they all need to be represented at the table, more importantly is that grassroots, grass tips, people with lived experience, intended beneficiaries, that whole segment of the community needs to be at the table for a number of reasons. The most important of which is you're going to get better strategies and interventions when you talk to people who've experienced the problem, not only academically or through work, but in real life. And maximizing the synergy of bringing the various talents and skills together produces better outcomes. The other reason you want to do that is ultimately every collaborative or agency is going to leave neighborhoods and communities. And if the effective strategies and interventions are going to continue, it's going to be because people in those neighborhoods and communities that you've established those relationships believe in what's going on and they will sustain the work. So it's a sustainability strategy as well. Equity in collaboration and interventions, I'm not even going to mention at this point because I'm going to spend a lot of time on equity. But I do want to talk about shared power. You need to be careful in these collaboratives and you need to be honest with people about what your agenda around sharing power is. And there are some tools out there I probably should have cited. This there is a community engagement toolkit at the Collective Impact Forum that you might want to take a look at, because one of the things that is reproduced in there from an international association on community participation is called the Spectrum of Community Engagement. And it's really important and a useful tool, because community engagement can mean everything from I tell them after I've made a decision and started doing what I'm going to do, all the way up to I'm empowering and want to empower the community to have decision-making responsibility. A lot of times people play games with that. They talk all the language about empowerment, but all the behavior is about, I'm just going to tell you what I've decided to do. Communities are sophisticated. They know with people with the money also make the decisions. They just want folks to be honest. If your stuff really ain't about empowering or collaborating with community, which is on the upper end of that spectrum, just tell people that, and then they can make an appropriate choice about how much they want to engage with you. We get into trouble because we talk on the right side of the scale and behave on the left side, and we lose all credibility with the community. And it's about the issue of sharing power. When I go into a situation of a collaborative, I look to see who's at the table and how diverse that is and representative of the stakeholder interest in the community. And I want to know how much power has been vested in that group. One of the things that I started to do in some of my work with different reactions is to say, if you're really about community engagement, put a majority of the decision-making body of community members. That is frightening. I have had only a couple breakthroughs where the people with the money have been willing to do that. And I'm working with one of them now. But that's really, be honest about sharing power, because you can build out this infrastructure, and it says a lot to folks about what your intentions are. And I'm going to be really honest, having dealt with this a long time, we really do need to shift power, because the people who have traditionally had power still have power, and they've produced outrageous results, failures in most of the most significant social problems we're facing. So I don't think it's high risk at all to bring some new stakeholders to the table and empower them to see if they can do any better. So those are the three missing elements to me. I would hasten to add that a number of us, including the original authors of the Collective Impact article, are about to publish a 10-year anniversary article on collective impact in the Stanford Social Innovation Review in the fall. And we've reframed some of this to make sure that these issues get highlighted. So one of the things that's really important about collective impact is most of the work that we've traditionally done around social change work has been, what's the program that we want to put in place to solve the problem? And much akin to what we found in other areas of American life, it's not programs, that there are systemic problems. And therefore, and it's not to reject the notion that one would do things that focus on programming. Taking programs to scale is a systemic intervention. Coordinating programs and services is a systemic intervention. But what we want to make sure is that people don't focus so much on the programmatic that they lose a sense that sustainable change is really embedded in a systemic change. Here is Kanya Kramer and Peter Senge in 2018, I believe, published an article. And this is a very useful diagram to help people think about, well, what is systems change? And as you see, they've divided it into structural types changes versus transformative. And they've identified some specific things at the structural level: policy, practices, resource flows. There's this relational power dynamic set of conditions, and then there are mental models. Very quickly, I know a lot of emphasis. What the author says, you need to work on all of these, right? I don't work on mental models anymore. I gave up on that. I've been disabused of any ability to change people's minds. What I do is the structural work. I work up here because once you do get people's minds right, there needs to be a structure which encourages, supports, demands, and rewards the appropriate sets of behavior by people within systems. And that's where my work is. I help folks with the structural stuff. As I said, early on, I did a lot of the mental stuff. I used to do school desegregation 30 or 40 years ago, and we were all about doing hearts and minds. And the lesson that I drew from that is we worked on people's hearts and minds. They learned the socially appropriate responses, and they went into the classrooms and screwed over the black kids. And so I'm not a hearts and mind person anymore. I know that work needs to happen. I just ain't the right one to do that. I will work with colleagues on doing that. I'm the structuralist right now. I want to make sure that there's a structure that supports people who are appropriately behaving around some of the decisions that cause inequities and disparities. But here's a good tool for people to think about. If you're arguing that we're doing systems change, map out your strategies and interventions. Where do they fall in this sort of diagram, so that you're sure, as the author suggests, that you're working on all three of these levels in order to get sustainable systemic change. Now, I'm just going to show this one real quickly. I'm not going to clip through all of it. No, went through it. So here's just a diagram of the way that many collaboratives get organized. And I show this because when I mentioned earlier that you've got to build an infrastructure for collaboration to operate effectively, this is what I'm talking about. Basically, most collaboratives have some structure similar or akin to this. You have some sort of steering committee that is responsible for some decision-making coordination, holding the vision for the entire collaborative enterprise. Sometimes people have broken off and have an executive committee as a subset of that. You've got a backbone support system, whether it's a single organization or multiple organizations. But the real work happens out here in the work groups that sometimes are organized around the strategies or interventions that folks have decided. They sometimes might be functional, like a fundraising or a data system, whatever makes sense to folks. But the point I would make is, as much as you can embed decision making out here, the better off you're going to be. Because what you have an opportunity is not only your leadership and your steering committee, but to bring a wide array of the diverse community in. So line workers, young people, parents, other folks who know about the problem, you're bringing them in and you're empowering them. And I often try to encourage people, have this body not being the big decision making, but being the broker, the coordinator, the organizer, to make sure that all of what's coming out of here gets coordinated and gets the kind of support that they need. So again, a lot of different models, but you're building out this organizational structure so that you can effectively do the collaborative work. Okay. And let me pause for a moment and see any burning questions. Okay. And I see somebody found the collective impact engagement. There are two charts in there that are really great, the spectrum, and there's a second diagram that's a circular that lets you plot out in your collaborative how close to the core of the beneficiaries are the people sitting around your table, which is a great exercise because it can really elucidate kind of how representative your group is. Okay, I want to jump in and talk a little bit about equity. The first thing I need to say is that whenever I start working, I start with definitions. And if you're doing equity work, you need to start with definitions. People do not understand some of the basic terminology. So it makes it difficult to have a conversation if half of the people in the room are using equity and equality interchangeably, and another part of the room has no idea what equity is. So it's really important to define some core terms like equity, but it's not only equity. There's diversity, there's inclusion, there's belonging, there's intersectionality, there are protected groups. There is a language around navigating equity effectively that you need to have a shared language around this. So I'm just for the purposes today, and there are a lot of resources out there if anyone needs them. Rockefeller or Ford Foundation. There are a lot of folks who've already gone through this portion where they've amassed and collected a lot of definitions to get you started. But you want to ground your people in common, shared language so that you can have. These are difficult conversations, and especially if you're dealing with issues of race and ethnicity. Here are a couple sample definitions. One is really aspirational from Policy Link. The second one comes from my former organization and is a little more tactical because we were doing on the ground work. Both have equity and have fairness as a part of the definitions. But the reason we developed the urban strategies definition, because we wanted to help people become action oriented, systematically assessing disparities, a key concept in terms of equity. We have produced disparate opportunities and outcomes in the society by virtue of the structure and systems that we've designed and employed, many of them, whether people like it or not, with race as a root motivation for a lot of things. And how do you exclude people of color from them? Obviously, Black people, Native people, and other shades in the color spectrum of America. So the notion of disparities and disparities that are produced by the decision making of those in positions of power is a key concept here. Secondly, the disparities can be around representation at tables. It can be around opportunities. And most importantly, it's around outcomes. We went through a period in this country where we defined all of the equity around opportunity. If we just make the opportunities there, what we discovered is that some of these, because it's embedded systemic structural problem, it's not just opportunities. And speaking of race as an issue with respect to equity, I would be blunt in simply saying that our period for leveraging the problem of inequality and inequity at the opportunity level is gone. We have to focus on outcomes now, because the period of 300 or 400 years when we could have really restructured around opportunity, it's all gone now. So what we need to focus on is the fact that we've got to produce equitable outcomes at this point to turn around the historical patterns of disenfranchisement, marginalization, out and out hostile discrimination against people of color in this country. Note one other thing, these definitions don't mention race. And one of the big issues that people have to address when dealing with equity is, are you going to leave it kind of just global like that, or are you going to focus on racial equity? A lot of my work and other people's work focuses on racial equity because that's the most insidious form of discrimination. What we've done with respect to race in this country is abominable, to say the least, and the most vicious, tyrannical, exploitative practices that have been visited on people are what happened to Native folks and displacing them from their land, and then what happened to Black folks. So race is an important issue, but it's not an exclusive one. When I work in the South or in rural communities, you can't go in with race, you know. In California, hopefully, we're a little better off where you can. So, and I'm going to show you a tool on how to get to that issue in a little bit. but the idea of taking targeted action to achieve structural, systemic, and programmatic change. Let me be blunt once again. If you or your community or your group is not into the idea that you can target your strategies and interventions to the needs of specific subpopulations, you ain't going to be effective in terms of remedying problems of inequity. So much of the pattern of inequity that people experience are the result of the experience of their people. The Black experience in America, both those slaves who came in as slaves and those who immigrated here freely. You need to have that historical structural context to understand the data and to come up with the right strategy and intervention to reduce or eliminate disparities for that group. And the same for Native people, the same for LGBTQ people, the same for veterans, the same for poor folk, the same for region or rural folks. You really need to be able to say something has happened because of a characteristic of this population that is specific to them, and therefore the intervention and remedy needs to take that into account and needs to be targeted toward them. That notion jars with most people's sense of the American ethos of equality. Equality has never been practiced in America, right? It's a nice myth, and it's a nice, as some people describe it, bedtime story, but it ain't the reality. And I just make that point to make it, if you're not willing to say, something has really happened in terms of the experience of X group, this Central American immigrants or whomever it is, and we need to specifically address their needs, and it's okay to do things specifically for them. If we can't get there, then you're unlikely to have really deep, systemic, sustainable change occur. Many of you have seen this diagram. This is a great illustration because this gets to the structural systemic issue. And what I found is many people don't understand what's going on here. So I'm going to take a quick minute to explain. In the first image, we're sort of recognizing that something is wrong. One of the three kids there cannot see what's going on in that field. So we have an equity, right? We immediately go in to try to do some immediate relief of that situation, and we find a temporary fix that sort of evens the playing field so all of them can do that. The real work of equity is stepping back after you've done the temporary relief of the disparity or the inequitable treatment or outcome to say, why was that the way it was? And was that really necessary and appropriate? All of us understand baseball, so when we do that analysis and we step back from baseball, what we say is, that fence really does need to be there because it's a demarcation of the most exciting play in baseball, the home run. My goodness, you need a fence. It tells everybody that moment has happened. So we need a fence. But then as we deep down, but that fence is barring. Then is there a way that we can have a fence and not eliminate someone's access? 3, the systemic structural change. That's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to interrogate every place where we're producing disparate outcomes and ask, why does that outcome happen? And do the underlying factors really need to happen? And this analysis is a great example of that interrogation of the situation helps us to figure out, we need a barrier, but we can effectuate the need of both the baseball teams and that young kid who can't see over that fence. That's really about what equity is. It's doing something only one kid couldn't see, but we started considering what the needs of that kid were. It's very targeted and specific. Okay. Oh my goodness, I'm over time. Time check, please.
Junius, you're good until 10:15.
Okay, so let me do a couple of tools. One of the things that people need to do is to situate their equity work. And I'm going to show you two tools quickly that'll help you situate where your work is. Everybody talks about looking at stuff through a data lens, the equity lens, and that is important, but it's pedestrian. It's an entry piece. And be careful on that. When people are kind of exclaiming how wonderful they are because they started looking at things through an equity lens, those of us who are people of color, who are women, who are other people who have been marginalized, we sort of laugh and say, where the hell have you been? You know, because we've been looking at that in pattern and practice and everyday experience our entire lives. So it ain't no big revelation that all of a sudden you figured out that you need to look at this thing through the lens. I'm not trying to be dismissive, but I'm trying to say that for many of us, that's no big accomplishment. And it's a part of the problem of white privilege is that you don't know your privilege when you're privileged. It's only, you know, when somebody else kind of jars you. But a data and equity lens is important. I don't want to minimize it, but it's just putting your foot into the water and with a full knowledge and recognition that we know what the data is likely to say. We've been dealing with it. We've been observing real life. But anyway, so that's one step and an entry point. Then a lot of organizations want to do, well, let's make a statement about principles and values on equity. I saw hundreds of those all over the country in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder and the racial awakening that happened. It wasn't a reckoning. It was an awakening. Reckoning means that you've kind of taken an account and you got the bill together. America hasn't yet on race, so it was an awakening, it was a reckoning. Those have some values. Telling people where you stand, be their employees or community, is an important step. But it's just a starting point, and you need to be careful that once you make that pronouncement of who you are and what you stand for, that people can see in your behavior that you're living up to that set of principles. Where the stuff really gets tough is strategy. Adopting strategies and interventions that have equity as a major component of those to try to impact the disparities and reduce disparities for specific population groups. The next sort of implementation or form of equity action is adopting policies that require equity as a foundation for policies and procedures and programs. There's equity as an outcome. In some organizations, there's an equity outcome for every element of their work, so they know exactly not only how we want to get or where we want to get the population universally, but how we want to close the gap between whoever is the best advantaged and the least advantaged group. And then there's equity as a North Star. And a few organizations have said, there ain't nothing that happens in this organization that ain't about equity. San Francisco Foundation is one of those organizations. There are others around the country. So those are different activities or actions that people will take when they make a commitment to doing something about equity. And I'm not going to go through all these slides, but a series of slides after that just give you examples and links to different forms of equity there. As I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but you can go back and click through those and you'll get examples of those. I'm still working on finding all the best examples. But you've got a whole range of things that'll give you a sense about how people have implemented that. The second thing to understand is in situating your work, when you're working in a collaborative setting, all of a sudden there are 4 different levels at which you're trying to manage equity. So you've got some set of strategies or interventions, and you need to consider whether or not they are promoting and driving toward equity. So there's an equity agenda and practice around just what we're going to do about the problem. you've got some you've got some collaborative that you've put together, and you need to be paying attention to equity, composition, representation, all of the equity issues in your collaborative. Who's in leadership, who is not? What kind of power do people who are historically marginalized have at the table? All of that. You've got a backbone organization or organizations who are doing support for the collaborative. What's the equity agenda there? How diverse and inclusive is that staff? How much do they promote and understand equity in their work? And then, depending on the collaborative, I'm working with some collaboratives that have 100 members. What's the commitment of those 100 organizations to do their own organizational work around advancing equity within their organization? It's a little hard in the community if you've got a collaborative doing this, and I look at all 100 organizations and ain't nobody doing squat around equity. That says to me that this is a road show for public, because if you're going to make sustainable change, that change has to include how those individual partner organizations behave differently with respect to equity. I'm not going to go through this slide. I'm sorry, I really mismanaged my time. There are 4 tools that are here in the suite that focus on outcome, policy, and strategy forms of action. And they are really quickly the following. Organizational assessment. There are organizational equity assessment tools for the individual organizational partners to assess their operations for its equity policies and practices. I think if I didn't send Sarah I've got a bibliography with examples of all these tools. I forgot. I will send you that, Sarah. But a lot of different organizational equity assessment, and you really should push partners to do their own, to know where they're at around the equity agenda so that they can start advancing equity. The second thing that I want to mention is this notion of process mapping. Process mapping is decision making that results in inequities, your process, what happens in the child abuse prevention and reaction track. It's a whole notion that most of what we're concerned about, you can look at in terms of a process by which things happen, whether it's prevention or whether it's intervention once something happens, and looking at the data with respect to it so that you know by process mapping and aligning the data, you know at what stage of the process disparities are entering in. If you're doing a huge campaign, an information campaign to try to prevent abuse, then what do your data say about who is getting that message and who is it effective with? By race and ethnicity or whatever dimension of diversity is the focus of your work. But it's mapping out what's happening in the decision-making process and aligning it with data so you know where the disparities are coming into your outcomes so that you can be very surgical and strategic in where you put your interventions because they're responding to diversity. Equity impact analysis and targeted universalism. Let me do this really quickly. They're both around this basic idea, which is that you define a universal goal. What's the goal for all people that we want to accomplish? You measure that goal in the overall population. So if we, then you measure that for segments of the population. You understand what are the group-based factors that produce different outcomes, and you implement targeted strategies. Let me show you a really quick example, and I'll end here. Establish a universal goal, 100% proficiency for Staten Island third graders. That's our goal, 100%. We measure against the overall population. 47% of the kids are at grade level right now. We measure the performance across population segments. We disaggregate the data to look by race and ethnicity, and lo and behold, we see that 47% is widely different, from 63% for white kids to only 32% of Latinx kids. So we know where it's impacting differentially. We identify the influential barriers to progress for each of the population groups. We literally sit down with white families, black families and advocates and folks who work with them, Latinx and Asian, and we try to understand what's going on with that particular group that is producing the disparate outcomes. We're very race conscious, we're very ethnic, linguistically conscious, because we know the factors of race and language are how these disparities got produced. So if we're going to turn them around, we need to go right back through those same factors to maximize. And then we implement, and this is the point I was making, we just say, okay, Latinx kids, one of the factors is that they're Spanish speaking and we got shitty English language learning, programs. And we need to buttress those. That's not the same issue for black kids. They may have a dialect issue, they ain't speaking proper English, but the remediation of that is different than those kids who are Spanish speakers. So we get very specific and targeted so that we know how we get everybody to that 100%. That is targeted universalism. It's the other strategy that is listed there. Equity impact analysis is a similar approach and tool, but it gets that analysis of who's experiencing the opportunities, rewards, or punishment, and we work specifically with those groups to figure out what strategies are going to help them to achieve that universal goal. And I'm sorry, let me just stop really quickly. You've got the slides here.
Yes. Can we take some questions?
I will. I just want to do one other thing really quickly.
Okay.
At the end of the deck, you will find a link to the Collective Impact Forum, some resources on collective impact, some resources on collaborating for equity, and some contact information if you want to fuss with me later. So we'll throw it open to any questions, comments, critiques, criticism. I'm open to whatever.
Thank you so much, Junius. I think I have a feeling, just hearing a little bit of things I'm getting over text, that folks are really glad to spend the time with this. We can shave a little bit off our breakout groups to give this the attention it needs. I'm going to call attention to a couple things in chat. One, I think I'll respond to, but you may have something. And then one is a direct question. There are a couple comments and questions around applying the shared power to current legislation around system of care teams in California, the AB 2083. And my suggestion is, if it's around specific legislation, that's a great topic for your breakout groups. But I don't know if you have any thoughts around that, Junius. And the other one was someone asking for you to share the community engagement tool you mentioned.
Yeah. If you look in chat, somebody went and put the link to that right in the chat. It's up a little higher. It's near the top, but it's there for you, and I will copy and paste it towards the end. And I don't know that system of care team construct well enough to comment on its implications, but as Michael was saying, it's probably a good one. Here, let me, can't do two things at once. I just repasted that tool, so it's at the bottom of the chat. My general sense of most of the structures that we create statutorily and that we structure locally, I know in county and city, we kind of structure them to have power remain where it is traditionally been. I'm sorry, that's just the way that we operate. And what we need to do is to break out of that. And I know that feels uneasy and dangerous to a lot of decision makers, but you just gotta plunge. You gotta plunge into it. And what I keep saying is, in a lot of these areas, we could do no worse, you know, than what we've let the bureaucrats and the other leaders do by integrating some community wisdom, some diversity, some other visions and experiences into the decision making. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Junius. We have a question from Rocio Abundis, Santa Clara. Rocio, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about how to ask it. First of all, thank you. This was awesome. I wanted to affirm that I think the relationship and trust building is so critical to this work, and yet it also takes a huge time investment to get there. And those two things have to go along with the decision making, right? Before we can even create some structure for decision making, the relationship and trust building have to happen. So I say that to lead into my question about systems changing and adapting to this need to engage community. I'll give an example. In my county, when we started doing a lot of our prevention work, they wanted to see products. What are you doing? What can we show? What change are we making? And I kept saying the relationship building is product. And it's just as important as, you know, the widgets that we can show. The process is product. And so I can't measure that. And yet, in order to affirm that that work is important within our county, how do I measure that so that they know that our staff time is being well spent, though we can't really show, you know, the change that it's making immediately? It's going to take some time before we get there. So I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts about that. Hopefully that made sense.
Yes. One of my colleagues at the Collective Impact Forum, he's the other senior advisor there, Paul Schmidt, has this saying that collaboration develops at the speed of trust. And I think that that's sort of characterizes that, especially because when you're bringing in diverse groups, and especially when you're getting people with lived experience, they come in with some distrust. These are the same systems that typically have not worked for them and their families, and sometimes it's intergenerational, and sometimes those of us who are on the other side of the table get put off because you think that, you know, we're here to help and they should trust us. You've got to build that sort of trust. You've captured one of, I think, the most fundamental problems about the change process and work right now is that all of our measures, most of our measures, let me not exaggerate, most of our measures are still measuring as if our analysis of the causation was a personal problem on the part of the individual. So all our data measures and our administrative data sets, one can infer from those that there's something that's problematic about them people, and because all our measures are there. We are not measuring the things that we're doing, and it's critically important, and you captured one. If the initial work is building your infrastructure, where are your tools for measuring? We built infrastructure. Where are your tools for measuring your communication system and how many people we're hitting? Where are your tools for measuring increase in trust? I really, and people say it's too much data, it's too much that. I really caution people, get yourself a nice, easy tool and put it in SurveyMonkey or Google Forms or something so that you can regularly collect data around how people are feeling about the level of trust, so that you've got some information that it's shifting, that people are feeling, you know, they're moving on their feelings about the level of trust. Even more fundamental is that most of our measures, we're talking the systems change stuff, most of the measures in our administrative data sets don't give us the data in which to measure whether or not we've been effective in our systems change strategies. So we're making ourselves vulnerable. So people who are doing collaborative work really need to argue that we want to be accountable, but part of accountability is you making sure that the administrative data sets are there to permit us to evaluate what we're doing, and don't put that added burden, which a number of systems will do, on those few people in that collaborative to build an administrative data set for DSS. No, that's wrong. DSS needs to say, if we're going to do work this way, then we need to have built into our systems ways that you can quickly survey people on trust measures, where we're getting some systems change sort of data. But the sort of immediate survival thing is, I'm going to collect some data myself. The systemic change is starting to advocate that let's sit down with the data people and figure out how we create data systems that measure what it is we're supposed to be doing, which is systems change.
That is so awesome. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you. I totally agree. I can go on and on, but I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Wonderful. We also had a question from Judith, and we're going to go for about 4 more minutes, Junius,
Okay.
and then we'll transition to break and also then into the next breakout. So Judith asked, can you please speak to the process for how to get to a targeted or focus area, particularly interested in the role of community in the process?
Yeah, you get there, you're going back to that common agenda development. That's a really critical part of the process, because you're doing problem definition, but it's a great opportunity to talk to communities and to talk to residents. This whole thing about lived experience, lived expertise, so that you're generating a sense of how people define and explain the problem, and therefore how one analyzes the data around the problem. And since we have been bad at our data collection, it's an opportunity to really listen to residents about the experience. It's a way to add to that administrative data, where you're going to tell you about how many incidents of child abuse there have been by race and gender and ethnicity over whatever period of time. But listening to people from the community, what are the stories behind that? There's this whole notion going on right now that I think is a compelling one. No data without stories, no stories without data. They go together. The stories are going to come from community folks. And it gives you an opportunity. It's going back to the prior question about building trust. Part of building trust is building empathy. Part of building empathy is listening to people and hearing what they say and acknowledging what they say. And while I may not agree with it, I validate what you said as your experience, and I'm not challenging you. So that whole part of the process, I think, is really important. But what I want to get to is that part of what you're getting to as you define the problem is what people are calling this root cause analysis. A lot of different tools for doing that. But once you kind of get a sense of defining the problem, what you're doing is you're interrogating that problem. And, you know, there are different models, as I said, the 5 whys. You're pressing yourself. Well, kids are getting abused. Why? And people say, well, parents are just really under pressure and they're acting out. Why? You just keep pushing down to try to get to what the root cause is. And the purpose of that is so that when people really can go deep and understand, it begins to illuminate some of what you're calling the target or focus, that the real root causes of some of these problems get illuminated in that, where people say, oh, okay, we're in 3 different focus groups and everybody sort of got to something here. It's probably where the treasure is. So let's drill down and figure out what the strategies and interventions are that we could deploy on this focus, on this sort of problem analysis and causation sort of inquiry that we did. So that's how people get there. If you just Google root cause analysis, you'll see a lot of different models that prop up. There is a handbook on developing a common agenda that's also available on the collective impact, and it'll guide you through some of the steps. Now, I disagree. I don't like to stay in planning processes. The Tamarack Institute and others say that you can plan for collaborative work and it might take 12 to 18 months. I don't know any community or any problem I work on that I'm willing to wait another 12 or 18 months to get started on. So I'm a real advocate of dual track, that when we're doing this process, peeling some people off who are the action actors. I've planned, I've talked about this shit forever, I'm ready to do something. Your collaborative needs to have a place for them people who are through talking and want to do something. And you need to have a track of work that continues to be deliberate and focused on generating what it is in long-term strategies, but you invariably discover along the way some what are called quick wins. You find a problem and you say, I can't believe that. One quick thing I'll do before I end. The example in Seattle with their Cradle to Career is a good example of this. They're trying to figure out how to get kids into college and post-secondary education and careers, and in the course of their inquiry, they figured out, wow, this is really odd. Our kids are not applying for the money that is paid in the state of Washington. If you graduate with a C or better from an accredited high school, you get 4 years free tuition at any state institution, and their kids weren't doing it. They started unfolding the thing, and what they figured out is that FAFSA, the financial eligibility tool that universities, kids weren't doing that. They said, this is crazy. That's all that's standing in the way. So in a matter of a short period of time, while they were doing the long-term planning, they carved that out. They got everybody together, United Way, the counselors at the schools and others, and said, this is unacceptable. They did an all-out push and got that level in a matter of a year up in excess of 90%. Again, the idea is some things for people who are action-oriented that are discovered along the way. You let them do that while the other folks are doing this deliberate planning process.
Junius, I'm so sorry to jump in. I feel like we could have you take this conference. I really cannot tell you how much I've appreciated this discussion. I've been getting a lot of messages from people that they want to hear more. And I think we have some wonderful opportunities to bring you back for further discussion in maybe one of our upcoming webinars or our learning exchange on equity. So would love to be in touch with you about that.
And thank all of you. And I'm sorry I managed my time so poorly that I didn't get through all the prepared materials. But you have my contact. If something's still bothering you, please feel free to drop me an email and I'll get back to you. And good luck. And good luck with the program. And thanks for the invite.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. I know we are not in a room where we can clap, but I'm sure I can speak for many that this has been wonderful and really so thought-provoking in terms of how we're going to do community engagement and bring that community voice, that expertise into our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. All right, everyone. So just really quickly, I'm going to give some instruction before we take our 10-minute break.
Period in prevention planning and prevention implementation. And way back when some of us started this, oh, there we are. Thank you so much. If you can go to the next slide. Basically, I do want to take a little trip down memory lane and look a little bit at where we started and how we got to here, as well as where we need to go next. And so on the next slide is really the beginning of when I started my work in prevention. Thank you. And I called it phase one, but the reality is, in terms of prevention, it really was the Stone Age, relatively speaking. At that time, yes, there was in California Code some statements about child abuse prevention councils. At that time, the word prevention was not in that statute. It was just child abuse coordinating councils. There was a lot of activity at that point about mandated reporters, and it was mainly about figuring out more and more people who could be listed as mandated reporters, while there was no intent for training them or what the outcome was. And as we know, mandated reporting is an after the fact kind of activity. Something has already happened that's triggered a report. There was a little tiny bit of funding back then based on birth certificates. And those of you who perhaps have followed that over the years know that it gets to be a smaller and smaller amount of funding, relatively speaking. But there was a little bit of funding there, a real little bit of funding. At kind of the very end of that Stone Age, when the California Child Welfare Council was enacted, the leadership from Department of Social Services at that time said, I think one of the committees might ought to be about prevention and early intervention. And at that moment in time on the council, there were only 2 of us on this very large council who had any prevention activities going on. So we were a kind of small but mighty group of people. So we enlisted some others to help us. But at that point in time, it was like a major victory to even have the word prevention put into that context. So moving along from phase 1 to phase 2, which I guess I would say is the Bronze Age of prevention, a few things started to happen. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but just to give some examples. At that point in time, the Office of Child Abuse Prevention put out some funding for pilot programs in home visitation. Because it's California, the home visitation model had its very own name. As we know, we have CalWorks and we have CalFresh and so on. So aptly, it was also named relative to California, but it was based pretty loosely on the Healthy Families America model. The pilots were enacted. They were pretty successful, but as these things go, the funding did not last. Another thing that happened that is very important and ongoing is that there was a recognition that the field needed training and support. And so strategies was started, and the first real funding, there had been some mandated reporter funding, but that was really kind of the beginning of supporting and enhancing the field itself. For another brief period of time, the CAPCs were organized into regions, and they each had a regional coordinator. And it really did build some networking and some standardization of some of the activities by the CAPCs. There was also some work during that time of trying to have an assessment tool that would be used across many, many programs so that we could get better data. Again, that went by the wayside. The field itself began to work collectively on developing standards of practice training. And I'm happy to say that does still exist and is still available. And many of you know that with the publication of Vehicles for Change, Volume 1, at that time we didn't know it was a Volume 1, that really became the roadmap. That also became the document that we could use to talk about family resource centers and other services in terms of our advocacy, because we had something concrete that we could share. So a lot of things happened during the Bronze Age. But then moving on to where we are today, which I suppose in context I would call the Golden Age, things have sped up. Basically, the speed of change and recognition of prevention has gotten faster and faster and more widespread. Starting off with certainly Volume 2 of Vehicles for Change, which is a wonderful document. I know Judy Sherman is with us today, and she's the principal author. And that document really shows the change and the role as change agents that family resource centers and their partners are. And then once again, there was funding for home visitation, but this time much broader so that every county that wanted to participate can do that in the CalWorks home visitation funding. And we're very pleased that that is continuing as of now. Something that never would have happened and ever in my imagination before it in fact did happen, is that the County Welfare Directors Association developed and started with a group of really dedicated directors at the county level to have a prevention cabinet. And ultimately that prevention cabinet got named the Child and Family Enrichment Cabinet and is one of the primary partners in the original summit, as well as what we're doing here today. Also during the golden age, some of us were really excited when counties took the great leap to say that they were going to participate in the Title 4B waiver. They were going to put their money where their mouths were, and they were going to do prevention with those funding and demonstrate a change. And they did do that. Sadly, it did not continue at the federal level. Of course, then we have to go back and think about how we all got to this place today in these planning groups, in these county planning teams. Really started with the summit. And I want to tell you, for those of you who maybe weren't around at that time, those of us who were engaged in the planning for the summit really sat around the table and said, is anybody going to even come? We're asking that the county welfare director, as well as the CAPC, put together a team, a collaborative cross-sector team, and they have to come, at least 10 of them. And there are expectations, and they had to do self-assessments ahead of time. There were all kinds of requirements. Well, to our shock and dismay, 33 counties applied to come to that summit. Sadly, we did not have enough room for everyone to be there, but that was really a pivotal moment. And I will tell you, it was a pivotal moment for me because I could not have imagined that many counties and that many cross-sector individuals and leaders would decide to make this a priority. And it was really clear from the beginning, it was a long-term priority. And as Junius said, we have to really look at this whole process as being long-term and ultimately large scale. So the CAPCs who had been in statute with a little bit of change, but not much recognition, then indeed there was a change with the CAPC best practice manual. And it really defined the roles much more clearly than the statute did in terms of the roles that CAPCs play in the counties. And I have seen changes in the recognition of CAPCs as a result of that. We're all probably more aware than we would like to be in some ways with the Families First Prevention Services Act, which I jokingly say is, if you want something like that passed, find a senator who's been around a long time, who's going to retire, and put his name on it. And that will certainly help. And though the Families First Prevention Services Act is not everything that we would all want, it doesn't include primary prevention. It's really more secondary and tertiary, but it's an important step that it happened at the federal government. And then finally, funding, actual funding from the state has gone to family resource centers. At first, with a very small amount for a 3-month period, but now with a $13 million allocation happening this year. It's specific to the COVID as opposed to being just a recognition of the wonderful work that happens throughout the state, but it is another important milestone. So you are right now in the golden age. All of these things have happened very, very quickly relative to the 3 decades that we talked about. But where are we really? Let's look at where we are in this next slide. We put the X kind of midway, except that when you really look down this lane, you find that we're not really there yet. There's still a long way to go on that path. We have much to do. And my little list, which again is also not exhaustive, is really about some of the things that are pending right now that you're all thinking about and working on. Clearly, we need stable funding for prevention. There's never been enough. There's never been a real, a really big ability to get that kind of funding and recognition for the need. So that's critically important if we want to make a difference, if you all are going to be able to implement your plans. We also know and are learning, and certainly Junius as well as Cheryl this morning talked about how important it is to have the lived expertise, those with that expertise really leading and showing the way for what our next steps are in prevention. We know we need system changes. We know whether it's in funding or in policies and procedures, we continue to have silos. We continue, if you look in your own county planning team, probably there are families that multiple agencies are currently working with without that kind of communication and support and really helping the whole family. There's absolutely no question that issues of equity and racial disparity are top on our list of things that have to change and have to happen, and that we all need to do the really long work to make that be true. For as long as I've been in this field, we've talked about poverty. And I hate to tell you this, but it hasn't really changed. And so economic reforms to support our families and our communities is also a part of our work. When I talked about happening back in the Stone Age, we just talked about mandated reporters and making sure that they got trained and making sure that people would make calls and so on. But now what we're talking about more and more is mandated supporters, finding ways to support those people who are designated as mandated reporters to actually help get supports for families. So there are a lot of things that need to happen. And you, my friends, are actually the leaders in making this happen, because what you are doing right now and the network of all of you is really going to be the basis for this next phase. And I'm going to call it the platinum phase. And I know that you can make that difference, because right now you are doing the planning. Some of you are on the verge of implementing programs. You're already talking about how you're going to evaluate them, how you're going to keep them working and make the changes that you need to do along the way. And ultimately, what you're going to demonstrate in more than half the counties in California is that prevention works. And when that happens, we are truly going to be in the platinum age. I am honored to be among you. I'm honored to be on one of the county planning committees. And I think that you need to keep in mind how important it is, as Junius said, about the long term. I think it's important for all of us to think that if we step out of our roles, we make sure that our sector is still represented and that there is still a commitment among the agencies. And just being here today and having the opportunity to hear from some of you in the breakout rooms, and so many of you that I already know who are doing this work, this is really going to be fast. Things are going to change. It's going to be messy, but you are going to be the leaders to bring us into the next state of prevention. And I thank you very much.
Wonderful, Sheila. Thank you so much for that presentation. I apologize for getting the presentation up a little late, but thank you. So just quickly, we wanted to share with folks a little bit about day 2. In the morning, there will also be a networking session from 8:30 to 9. That'll be by region. So you'll get a chance to talk with some of the folks you may have met for the first time today. We'll have Cheryl Treadwell welcoming us. We'll have prevention planning and tribal engagement, a presentation and discussion with Stephanie Weldon from the Office of Tribal Affairs. Following that, we'll have our topical workshops and that breakout. And please remember, send your different team members, coordinate with your team to go to different workshops. So that way you can share your learning from each in the afternoon breakout tomorrow. That's the county team breakout. We'll have Hassan Davis, who is an amazing speaker, a gentleman with an incredible amount of lived expertise, who will be talking to us about his work and systems change. And again, we'll have our virtual brown bag county lunch. Those will be open and optional tomorrow, but we hope you'll come back together with your county and get a chance to continue discussions that you were having today. So one thing I'd like to point to your attention, we would truly, truly love your feedback about how today went. So I see that we have in the chat box now. Please take a few minutes to share your feedback on today. It will help us not only for tomorrow's planning, but it will help us long term as we continue to plan and facilitate further convenings.
Sarah, this is Kathy. Can we put up, we've got some questions about what the breakout options are. And I believe Stuart has a slide that laundry lists the names of them. May we just take a second and just put that on the screen so people can see a snapshot of that?
Absolutely, that would be great.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Stuart. There we go. And we've numbered.
Always adaptable.
Yeah, appreciate it. So we've numbered the workshops. So tomorrow we're going to ask you, when you're telling us where you need to go, we want to know the number of the room that you want to go in. So if you want to jot that down now or jot that down in the morning, but that's what we'll be asking you for. That's it. Thank you.
Great, Kathy, thank you. So if we can, Stuart, are you able to pull up the prior presentation? Sorry for the shifting.
Yep.
Thank you.
Testing my dexterity, but
Can you go one slide back, please? Thank you.
Great, thank you. So one thing we wanted to let you know about, a lot of folks in your conversations talked about how can we get more people on board with our effort. And so we are sponsoring a webinar with Dan Heath, the author of Upstream, The Quest to Solve Problems Before They Happen. So all about the power of prevention. So if you really want to make the case for prevention to any of your county leaders, elected leaders, community members, faith community, folks who might not speak the insider social services language and want to hear from a best-selling author, it's coming up on August 24th. If you go to strategyca.org, you can register. We even have a countdown clock. We're so excited about this. And we want to make sure that counties and your partners have first go at registering. So please register soon so that you can use it to get people on board. And so I'll go to the next slide. And again, the county rooms are set up for a virtual lunch to continue your conversation from earlier if you like, to divide up the topics for tomorrow and think of anything else you need to do around planning. Again, if you need help getting into one of the rooms, please put it in chat. Otherwise, thank you everyone for an amazing conversation and a whole lot to think about today.
Thank you all.
I got a message that I was spotlighted. I don't need to be spotlighted. All right.
I need to.
Hi, Stuart, it's Judy. Quick question.
Yep.
I didn't plan with my group whether or not we were going to meet at 12:30. So how do I know if there's anybody in that breakout? Are you guys supposed to send me a link to it?
We can assign you to it. I'm looking right now to see if there's anybody in. There's nobody in Ventura yet, but I can put you there, and you can just see if anybody else shows up.
All right. I'm such a boomer.
I'm a boomer too, but
All right. Bye.
Is there anyone in the Stanislaus group?
Yeah, there is.
Could I possibly get sent there? That's Christine Huber.
It looks like you were invited and you haven't joined.
Oh, there it is. Thank you. Thanks, Mia.
You're welcome.
Is anyone in Santa Clara or Sacramento?
Someone's in Sacramento, I think, for sure.
Okay, well, maybe you can send me there.
It's Jasmine right now from what I can see.
Okay.
It's Jasmine. I'm monitoring mine too, because I have a feeling my people were leaving.
Yeah, seems to be the thing.
Oh,
Thank-
Sarah's there. I can go in. Huh? I'll see if she's there.
Stuart and Mia, I have to log off now to go to my appointment. So
Yeah, no,
okay.
I think we got it. It's
I know you do. Take
well,
care.
maybe
Good luck.
we
Fingers
do.
crossed.
Yeah,
Same
thanks.
here,
I'll touch base
Stuart.
with you guys this afternoon, let you know. I'm gonna head over to the office right after that.
Cool.
Okay, great.
And Stuart, I'm going to call in because I have to head to a 1 o'clock appointment too.
Okay,
For the strategies folks and who are on, we're going to do a 30-minute lunch break and then come back to do a debrief a little bit after 1 o'clock at this point. 1:05. Does that work for folks?
This is
Sure.
This is Kathy. I added a program staff debrief room as a breakout room, so that's where we can head.
All right. I actually went in there and nobody was in there. I was like, wait, what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. See y'all then.
Okay.
Or are we going to a different room? Okay.
But
Program.
at 1 o'clock, 1:05, I think, right?
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. I
Take
missed
a break, eat some lunch, and then we'll come back and join the program staff debrief room at 1:05.
Great.
Thank you.
Peace. Bye.
anybody in the main room that still needs to be assigned? Doesn't look that way, but
Doesn't look like it. I'm looking at my little group. It doesn't look like anybody went in for Amador and Calaveras. Okay. I'll go have some lunch.
I see we have Alyssa from Nevada is still on in the main room with us. Alyssa, are you here?
It looks like she's
sure.
in the small contingent and not joined.
Oh,
yeah, I think I
nope.
gave, I think I assigned her there, but
It looks like she's there. It says not joined. Nevada Alyssa.
I know sometimes people, if they step away and didn't
Mm-hmm.
the event.
you want to move her back into the main room and tell her to do that, or? Yeah, I don't know. She'll figure, anyway, there doesn't look like there are very many people in that group.
I don't think that you can move people.
You can't
back.
move them to the main room. You can move them to like another room
Another room,
and then back
and
in.
just chase them around.
Yeah.
I'll be back. I'm gonna go make some lunch.
Okay,
I can hang you guys if you guys want to take a break because I made myself.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I was hoping to get on my run right now, so.
I know. Maybe you can do sit-ups or something in the corner.
I'm good. I'll just sit here, but it's not a major problem. Obviously, not something I worry that much about, but I can't eat before I run. So at some point I may pass out, but it's my own neurosis. So it's nobody's fault but my own.
Exactly.
My friend Crystal was on a Zoom and her boss started running on a treadmill and she was like, oh, that's weird. Do they know that we can see them or whatever? And then she took her shirt off. She was wearing like a sports shirt underneath, but everybody, I guess, lost their breath for a second. Like, oh God, what are we going to see? And they still don't know if she did it on purpose or not. Like if she knew that she was. Her
Hey, everybody.
All right, Stuart, hop on the treadmill, take your shirt off.
I know.
Well, you'll be pleased to know I never go anywhere with my shirt off. So.
Me either anymore.
I don't care. 112 degrees. I'm going to wear something.
Hey, Stuart, you're my therapist now because I have over the past quite a few years gotten into yoga and various other things, and I missed mine today. So hearing you lament over missing your run, I can relate.
There you go. Well, it's a small support group, but I'm here for you.
Hey, Mia, you see that the link I put in the chat for the survey?
Yes.
Would you mind grabbing that and going into the rooms where there are people and just
Oh, wait, no, I don't see it. I see Sally sent something.
It's before Sally.
Oh, okay.
By the way, a little heads up, we're still recording.
Ooh. I'm gonna stop that.
Uh-oh.